My name is Emily Carter, and for 34 years, I believed the hardest part of growing up was accepting that my parents would never choose me. I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering they had spent decades making sure everyone else believed they had. It all unraveled on a rainy Thursday morning in Seattle, standing inside a packed courtroom where my younger sister, Rachel, refused to look me in the eyes. The judge hadn't even spoken yet, but I already knew my family had made its choice. Again, if someone had told me 5 years earlier that everything would end there, I would have laughed. Back then, I still believed families eventually found their way back to each other. I believed apologies came before lawyers. I believed love outweighed pride. Most of all, I believed that if I kept being patient, eventually my parents would see me. Instead, I watched my mother slide across the courtroom bench to sit beside Rachel, placing a comforting hand over hers without looking at me once. That tiny movement hurt more than anything the judge would say that day. Because it wasn't new. It was simply familiar. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Sacramento, California, where every house looked almost identical from the street. Our family probably looked perfect too. Dad Richard was a respected high school principal. Mom Linda owned a successful interior design studio. They volunteered at church, hosted neighborhood barbecues, remembered everyone's birthdays. People constantly told me how lucky Rachel and I were. "You have amazing parents." I smiled every time, because explaining the truth sounded impossible. The favoritism wasn't obvious. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic punishments, just thousands of tiny decisions that slowly taught one child she mattered less. Rachel was 3 years younger than me. Beautiful, funny, naturally charming. She had the kind of personality that made strangers buy her ice cream just because she smiled. I loved her. At least I tried to. None of what happened was really Rachel's fault when we were children. She simply learned very early that the world rearranged itself for her. When I was 12, I won first place in the state science competition after working on my project for nearly 6 months. Dad missed the ceremony. Rachel had a dance recital rehearsal. When I graduated at the top of my architecture program 20 years later, Mom left halfway through because Rachel needed help picking out furniture for her first apartment. There was always something. Always someone. Always Rachel. Eventually, disappointment stopped feeling like an emotion. It became routine. After college, I moved to Seattle. I wanted distance. Not because I hated my family. Because every visit home left me wondering why I was never enough. I started working for a boutique architecture firm specializing in restoring historic buildings. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved breathing life back into forgotten places. Old buildings fascinated me. People rushed past cracked brick walls without noticing the stories hidden underneath. Families weren't much different. Sometimes the strongest foundation concealed the deepest fractures. Within 6 years, I became the youngest partner the firm had ever promoted. The local newspaper even published a feature about one of my restoration projects after it won a regional preservation award. Dad texted me, "Congratulations." 7 letters. No phone call. No celebration. An hour later, Mom posted 300 photos from Rachel's golden retriever's birthday party. The dog wore a custom cake hat. That post received over 600 comments. My award wasn't mentioned once. I wish I were exaggerating. Then I met Daniel. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was the kind of man who listened completely before answering. We met during the renovation of a century-old theater where his engineering company handled the structural work. Our first conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither of us noticed everyone else had already gone home. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen. Not because I had accomplished something. Not because I was useful. Simply because someone genuinely wanted to know me. A year later, Daniel proposed during a weekend trip along the Oregon coast. No photographers. No audience. Just crashing waves, cold wind, and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I cried before he even finished asking. Not because the proposal was perfect. Because someone had finally chosen me first. I honestly believed my parents would be happy. I told myself weddings changed families. They reminded people what truly mattered. I spent months convincing myself this would be different. That this time, they wouldn't let me down. I had no idea they were already making plans that would change every relationship in our family forever. The first warning came from my grandmother. She called me 2 weeks after Daniel proposed. At the time, I thought she simply wanted to congratulate us. Instead, after asking about the ring and the venue, she grew unusually quiet. Then she sighed. Emily, promise me something. What? If your parents disappoint you again, don't let it ruin your wedding. I laughed. They won't, Grandma. She didn't answer. You sound exactly like your grandfather did. What does that mean? It means you're still hoping people will become who they've never been. Those words stayed with me much longer than I expected. Daniel's family reacted the exact opposite way. His parents, Robert and Susan, drove almost 3 hours just to celebrate our engagement over dinner. Robert hugged me before I even reached the front door. I've waited years for Daniel to find someone who makes him smile like this. Susan squeezed my hands. We're so happy you're joining this family. Joining this family. Those 4 words almost made me cry. Not because they were dramatic. Because nobody in my own family had ever made me feel like I truly belonged. Planning the wedding became something I actually enjoyed. We chose a vineyard just outside Sonoma. Rows of grapevines stretched across rolling hills, and every evening the sunlight turned everything golden. It felt peaceful, hopeful, exactly how I wanted to begin a marriage. Daniel didn't care about expensive decorations. He kept saying, I'd marry you in a parking lot if it meant spending my life with you. I still laughed every time. Meanwhile, Susan and Robert somehow became more involved than my own parents. Robert helped us compare catering companies. Susan spent weekends visiting florists with me. When I apologized for taking so much of their time, Susan looked genuinely confused. This is what parents do. Parents, not in-laws. Parents. She never corrected herself. Neither did Robert. 3 months before the wedding, Mom finally invited me to lunch. I thought maybe she wanted to reconnect. Instead, she spent 45 minutes talking about Rachel. Rachel had recently launched an online lifestyle brand. According to Mom, it was going to become the next big thing. She showed me logo concepts, packaging samples, social media statistics, photos from promotional shoots. Eventually she paused. Oh, how's wedding planning? I almost laughed. Almost. It's going well. Good. Then she returned to talking about Rachel. By the end of lunch, she'd asked more questions about flower arrangements for Rachel's upcoming brand launch party than about my wedding. As I drove home, I realized something uncomfortable. If I stopped bringing up my own life. My parents almost never asked. About 6 weeks later, Dad called unexpectedly. He rarely called. My stomach actually flipped when I saw his name. Maybe this was it. Maybe he wanted to help. Maybe he wanted to tell me he was proud. Instead, he cleared his throat. Emily, I need a favor. Of course. What kind of favor? Rachel's company is growing faster than expected. I waited. She needs someone to redesign the office she's leasing. Silence. Dad, you do commercial architecture. I restore historic buildings. It's basically the same thing. It really isn't. We were hoping you could do it for free. For free. I closed my eyes. When's the deadline? About 3 weeks. 3 weeks. My own wedding was less than 2 months away. I was working 12-hour days finishing a museum restoration project. Dad knew that. Still, Rachel came first. Again. I can't. You can't. Or you won't. I don't have time. Another pause. Then came the sentence I'd heard my entire life. Family helps family. I answered before I could stop myself. Then why does family only seem to help Rachel? Dead silence. Dad hung up. He didn't call back. That weekend, Rachel texted me. Not to ask how I was doing. Not to congratulate me on the wedding. Just one sentence. Dad said you're refusing to support my business. I stared at the screen. Then typed, I'm getting married in 6 weeks. I don't have time to redesign an office for free. She responded almost instantly. You always make everything about yourself. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. My wedding. The event happening once in my lifetime. Somehow, I was still the selfish one. Daniel found me sitting on the kitchen floor 20 minutes later. I hadn't even realized I was crying. He quietly sat beside me. Didn't ask questions. Didn't offer solutions. Just wrapped one arm around my shoulders. After several minutes, he finally spoke. You know what? I've noticed something. What? You spend more energy trying to earn your parents' love than they spend giving it. I looked at him. He wasn't criticizing them. He wasn't criticizing me. He was simply stating a fact. And somehow, that hurt even more. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Still, I couldn't stop hoping. I kept telling myself that when they walked into that vineyard on my wedding day, everything would finally be different. I had no way of knowing that at almost that exact moment, my parents were having a conversation that would determine whether they came to my wedding at all. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. Not to ask how I was feeling. Not to ask if I needed help. She wanted to know whether I could move the ceremony. At first, I honestly thought she was joking. I'm sorry, what? Just by a few days. I laughed. A short, confused laugh. Mom, over 100 people have already booked flights. I know. The venue has been reserved for over a year. I know. The florist, photographer, caterer, everything is paid for. I know. There was a brief silence. Then she finally said the words that explained everything. Rachel has an opportunity. Of course she did. What kind of opportunity? A very important investor wants to meet her. When? Mom hesitated. The same weekend. I frowned. She can't meet him on Monday. He flies back to New York. What about Friday? He's busy. So, Mom inhaled slowly. We thought maybe your wedding could wait. Wait. My wedding. The event Daniel and I had spent 14 months planning. The event that had already cost us tens of thousands of dollars. The event people were flying across the country to attend. Could wait. Because Rachel had a business meeting. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Finally I whispered. You're serious. It's just one weekend, Emily. No. It's not. It's one day. My wedding day. Mom sounded irritated now. You've always been so inflexible. I almost laughed. Inflexible. Rachel's future is at stake. So is mine. Marriage isn't going anywhere. Neither was my patience. That evening I drove to Daniel's parents' house. Susan took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question. She simply opened her arms. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed someone to hold me until that moment. While Susan made tea, Robert quietly listened as I explained everything. Neither of them interrupted. When I finally finished, Robert leaned back in his chair. I've spent 40 years managing construction crews. I smiled weakly. I know. And I've learned something. What? When someone shows you their priorities. I believe them. The room became very quiet. Robert wasn't trying to convince me to cut off my parents. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was giving me permission to stop making excuses for people who had never made any for me. A few days later, Daniel convinced me to stop thinking about the phone call. "We're getting married." He smiled. "Let's enjoy that." So we spent Saturday tasting wedding cakes, Sunday choosing music, Monday finalizing seating arrangements. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt excited again. Then Tuesday happened. I was reviewing blueprints at work when my phone buzzed. "Rachel." I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hi." She sounded unusually cheerful. "Guess what?" "What?" "I got the investor." "Congratulations." "And?" She paused dramatically. "He invited me to present my company at the Pacific Business Summit." "That's great." "It's in Vancouver." "When?" She laughed. "You'll never believe it." My stomach tightened. "My wedding weekend." She didn't even sound apologetic. "It's unbelievable timing." I stared through my office window. Downtown Seattle blurred into gray. "You knew." "Knew what?" "You knew before Mom called me." Silence. "You already had the invitation." Another silence. "So, you all wanted me to move my wedding because of this." Rachel sighed dramatically. "Emily, this could change my whole life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So could my marriage. You'll still get married. And you'll still have your presentation." "This is different." "No, it isn't." She became impatient. "You've always been jealous." "Jealous?" That word followed me my entire childhood. Whenever I wanted equal treatment, I was jealous. Whenever I wanted my parents to attend something important, I was jealous. Whenever I didn't automatically sacrifice my plans, I was selfish. Jealous. Difficult. Too sensitive. The labels changed. The outcome never did. That night, Daniel found me deleting my parents' names from the seating chart. He quietly sat beside me. "You don't have to decide tonight." "I already have." "They're still coming." "Are they?" He didn't answer. Because neither of us actually believed that anymore. I looked down at the printed seating plan. Front row. 2 chairs. Reserved. Richard Carter. Linda Carter. For the first time since we started planning the wedding, I wondered if those chairs would stay empty. The thought made my chest ache. Not because I expected perfection, but because some small, stubborn part of me still believed every daughter deserved to look up during her wedding ceremony and see her parents smiling back. 5 days later, Dad called. His voice sounded unusually formal. "I've spoken with your mother." I already knew where this was going. "And we've made a decision." I gripped the phone tighter. The business summit is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Rachel. I closed my eyes. "So you've decided." "She needs us there." Not "we've decided." Not "we're sorry." Just, "she needs us there." I waited. Surely he would say they had found another flight. Another solution. Another compromise. Instead, he cleared his throat. "We won't be able to attend your wedding." The room became completely silent. Outside my apartment window, people continued walking down the sidewalk. Cars stopped at traffic lights. Someone laughed. The entire world kept moving. Mine didn't. "I understand," I heard myself say. Dad sounded relieved. "I knew you would." That sentence hurt more than the decision itself. Because he hadn't expected me to fight. He had expected me to accept it. Like I always had. Before hanging up, he added one more sentence. "We'll celebrate with you when we get back." As if my wedding were a birthday dinner that could simply be rescheduled. As if missing the most important moment of my life was no different than missing brunch. I sat motionless for nearly an hour. Then I picked up my phone and called exactly one person. Robert. Hi, kiddo. There was a long pause before I managed to speak. My dad isn't coming. Robert's voice softened immediately. I'm so sorry. Another silence. Then, before I could lose the courage to ask, I whispered, would you walk me down the aisle instead? Robert didn't answer immediately. For one terrifying second, I thought I had crossed a line. Then I heard him quietly clear his throat. Emily. His voice sounded different. Thicker. Emotional. I would be honored. The tears I'd been holding back all afternoon finally escaped. I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't. You don't. No. I feel grateful. I smiled through my tears. Grateful. I've never had a daughter. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Robert laughed softly. I guess life has a funny way of fixing things. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because my parents weren't coming. Because I had finally stopped waiting for them to change. For the first time since getting engaged, I started planning the wedding around the people who actually wanted to be there. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. Susan organized a small bridal brunch with a few close friends. Daniel's younger sister offered to help guests find their seats. Robert insisted on practicing our walk down the aisle because, as he put it, I'm probably going to be more nervous than you. He wasn't joking. Every evening after work, we'd spend 15 minutes walking slowly across his backyard. He'd keep stopping. Too fast. I'd laugh. No. What about now? Still no. I've never done this before. I haven't either. We'd both laugh until Susan came outside shaking her head. You two are impossible. Those moments slowly replaced the sadness I'd been carrying for years. I started realizing something that should have been obvious. Love wasn't supposed to feel like an audition. It wasn't something you earned by being quieter, working harder, or asking for less. The right people simply gave it. Freely. Without making you compete. A week before the wedding, Daniel and I met with our videographer, Marcus. He specialized in documentary-style weddings. Nothing staged. Nothing overly dramatic. His films felt honest. He asked us one question before the meeting ended. Is there anything important about your family dynamic I should know? Daniel glanced toward me. I hesitated. Then I smiled politely. My parents won't be attending. Marcus nodded respectfully. I'm sorry. Please don't make it a big part of the film. I won't. I want this day to be about the people who came. He smiled. I understand. At the time, I had no idea his camera would capture the single image that would eventually change everything. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear blue skies and warm California sunshine. The vineyard looked even more beautiful than I remembered. Rows of grapevines stretched endlessly across the hills, while soft white roses decorated the ceremony space. Everything felt peaceful. Almost unreal. Inside the bridal suite, my bridesmaids laughed as they helped me into my dress. Someone turned on music. Someone else opened champagne. For the first time in months, my phone stayed silent. No last-minute family drama. No guilt. No demands. Just peace. Then my maid of honor looked toward the window. I think your grandmother's here. I hurried over. Grandma Evelyn stepped carefully out of the car, using her cane. She was 82. Traveling wasn't easy anymore. Yet she'd flown across the country alone. The moment she saw me through the window, she smiled. Then she quietly wiped away a tear. I rushed outside before anyone could stop me. Grandma. Oh, sweetheart. She held my face with both hands. You look exactly like your mother did on her wedding day. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. You came. She looked almost offended. Of course I came. Then her smile faded. I wish. She stopped herself. What? I wish your grandfather could see this. He'd be proud. So proud. She squeezed my hand. And before you ask, I already told your parents exactly what I think. I blinked. You talked to them. I called them yesterday. What happened? Grandma's expression hardened. I told them there are some moments in life that never come back. What did they say? She looked away toward the vineyard. Your father said Rachel needed them more. The words no longer shocked me. They simply confirmed what I'd already accepted. Grandma looked back at me. Then I told him something. What? I said one day Rachel won't remember what they sacrificed. But you will. I felt my throat tighten. I think that upset him. It should have. She smiled gently. Now enough about them. She straightened my veil. Today's about you. An hour later, guests began filling the white chairs overlooking the vineyard. Laughter echoed across the property. Old college friends hugged each other. Children ran between the rows of vines. The string quartet quietly tuned their instruments. Everything looked exactly as I'd imagined 14 months earlier. Almost. 2 chairs remained empty in the very front row. Reserved. Richard Carter. Linda Carter. Nobody sat there. Nobody moved the name cards. Robert noticed me looking. You want me to have someone take them away? I stared at the chairs for a long moment. Then I slowly shook my head. No. You sure? Leave them. He looked confused. Why? Because they were invited. Robert understood immediately. He simply nodded. Sometimes silence says everything. None of us noticed Marcus standing 50 feet away. His camera was already recording. The music began, soft and steady, drifting across the vineyard as every guest turned toward the entrance. I took one slow breath. This is it, Susan whispered, adjusting a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I smiled. It finally is. Robert offered me his arm. His hands were shaking. I looked down and laughed. You're nervous. I told you I would be. You've given presentations in front of thousands of people. None of them were this important. My eyes filled with tears again. You know, he said quietly, I don't think anyone gets to choose the family they're born into. He looked directly at me. But I think we get to choose who we become because of them. Before I could answer, the coordinator nodded. It's time. The doors to the garden opened. Every guest stood. Daniel was waiting at the end of the aisle, looking impossibly calm until he saw me. The moment our eyes met, he completely lost his composure. He laughed once, then quickly wiped away a tear. The guests smiled. Someone sniffled. Marcus quietly moved his camera, capturing every expression without interrupting a single moment. As Robert and I began walking, I made one mistake. I looked toward the front row. 2 empty white chairs. Everything else was full. Grandparents, friends, coworkers, Daniel's relatives. Every seat around them held someone who had chosen to be there. Only those 2 remained untouched. For a split second, 12-year-old Emily returned. The little girl holding a science fair trophy while searching the audience for her father. The teenager scanning the crowd at graduation. The young architect checking her phone after winning an award. Always hoping. Always waiting. Then Robert squeezed my arm. Not hard. Just enough. A silent reminder. You're not alone anymore. I looked forward again. Daniel hadn't taken his eyes off me once. Neither had Susan. Or Grandma Evelyn. Or our friends. For the first time in my life, I stopped looking toward the people who weren't there. I started seeing everyone who was. By the time I reached the altar, I wasn't thinking about my parents anymore. I was thinking about my future. The ceremony itself was almost perfect. Daniel somehow forgot half of his vows because he kept smiling at me. I practiced these, he admitted, making everyone laugh. I can tell. I had a whole speech. I believe you. I just. He looked at me. Forgot everything except that I love you. Even the officiant laughed. My own vows were shorter than I'd planned. Not because I couldn't think of anything to say. Because every important thing suddenly felt simple. I spent most of my life wondering what it felt like to be someone's first choice. I took Daniel's hands. Now I know. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. After we exchanged rings and shared our first kiss, applause echoed across the vineyard. For the first time that entire day, I felt completely at peace. The reception began just before sunset. People laughed. Children danced barefoot on the grass. Robert somehow convinced my 82-year-old grandmother to dance with him. Susan cried during her toast. Daniel's best friend embarrassed him with college stories I'd never heard before. The evening felt effortless. No tension. No awkward conversations. No wondering whether someone would ruin the day. Around sunset, Marcus approached us. I'd like to grab a few golden hour shots. We followed him through the vineyard. He filmed us walking between the vines, talking, laughing, completely forgetting the camera was there. Then he paused. Emily. Yes. I want to try one last shot. What kind? He pointed toward the ceremony space. Just stand here for a second. I walked back toward the rows of white chairs. Most guests had already moved to the reception area. The front row remained exactly as it had been earlier. Except now the evening light stretched long shadows across the grass. Marcus framed the shot carefully. The two empty chairs sat in the foreground. I stood several rows behind them, slightly out of focus. Daniel quietly walked into frame beside me without being asked. He reached for my hand. Marcus never told us to pose. He simply let the moment happen. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us looked at the camera. We both looked at the empty chairs. After a few seconds, Marcus lowered his camera. Perfect. I smiled politely. What made you think of that? He shrugged. I don't know. It just felt like part of the story. At the time, it seemed like one small artistic decision. None of us imagined that 10-second clip would eventually be viewed by millions of people. Or that it would force my parents to answer questions they'd spent decades avoiding. Or that, 6 months later, a stranger would recognize me in an airport because of those two empty chairs. That evening, though, none of that mattered. We danced under strings of warm lights until nearly midnight. As the last guests began saying goodbye, Grandma Evelyn hugged me tightly. I've been waiting a long time to see you this happy. I almost let them ruin it. She smiled. But they didn't. No, they didn't. I truly believed that chapter of my life had finally closed. I had no idea it was only beginning. We returned to Seattle 2 days later with sore feet, hundreds of photos, and absolutely no regrets. For the first 48 hours, life felt wonderfully ordinary. We opened wedding gifts, argued over where to put a ridiculous ceramic bowl someone had given us, ordered takeout because neither of us wanted to cook. Every now and then, I'd catch myself looking at my wedding ring and smiling for no reason. It felt like a new beginning. Then Marcus called. Hey, Emily. Hi, everything okay? I've started editing the wedding film. That was fast. I know. He hesitated. I wanted to ask you something before I moved forward. Sure. I know you said you didn't want your parents to become the focus. Right. I still won't do that. Another pause. But I accidentally captured something incredibly powerful. I frowned. What do you mean? You'll understand when you see it. A week later, Marcus sent us a private preview link. Daniel and I waited until Friday evening to watch it together. We turned off the lights, made popcorn, sat on the couch. The opening shots were beautiful. Morning sunlight over the vineyard. Guests arriving. Flowers moving gently in the breeze. My grandmother smiling through tears. Daniel laughing with his groomsmen. Then Robert adjusting his tie before walking toward me. I cried almost immediately. The film didn't feel like a wedding video. It felt like someone had somehow captured every emotion we hadn't noticed in the moment. About halfway through, the music softened. The screen faded to a wide shot of the ceremony. The camera slowly moved across the front row. Grandma Evelyn, Susan, Daniel's cousins. Then, two empty white chairs. Their name cards clearly visible. Reserved for Richard and Linda Carter. The camera didn't linger. It simply continued moving until it reached Robert standing beside me. No narration. No dramatic music. No explanation. Just 10 quiet seconds. Daniel reached for my hand. I didn't even notice he filmed that. I didn't either. We finished the video in complete silence. When the credits rolled, Marcus called. So, I took a deep breath. It's beautiful. I wasn't sure about that shot. The chairs. Yeah. I kept thinking about removing it. I looked at Daniel. He slowly shook his head. No. I answered. Leave it. Are you sure? That's what happened. It isn't meant to embarrass anyone. It tells the truth. Marcus thanked us and promised the final version within a few days. I thought that would be the end of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. 2 weeks later, Marcus emailed us again. Random question, the subject line read. Inside was a message from a regional wedding film festival. They wanted permission to feature our wedding documentary in their annual online showcase. I laughed. Why would they want ours? Daniel smiled. Because it's good. They probably ask everyone. They don't. Marcus confirmed that only 12 films had been selected that year. Ours was one of them. We both agreed. Why not? The festival wasn't huge. Mostly filmmakers and photographers. Maybe a few thousand viewers. It sounded harmless. The documentary was uploaded on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday evening, Marcus texted me. I think something weird is happening. What? Look at the comments. I opened the video. 40,000 views. That seemed impossible. Then I scrolled. Thousands of comments. Not about my dress. Not about the venue. Not about the flowers. Almost every comment mentioned the same thing. Who were those empty chairs for? That shot broke my heart. The father-in-law walking her down the aisle made me cry. Who misses their daughter's wedding? You can tell there's a whole story here. I stared at the screen. People had noticed. Not because anyone explained it. Because they felt it. Marcus called again. I've never seen anything like this. It'll calm down. I don't think it will. He was right. A parenting blog shared the film. Then a wedding photography page. Then a relationship podcast. By Monday morning, the clip showing the empty chairs had been reposted on half a dozen social media accounts. None of them knew our names. They simply called it the two empty chairs. Within 10 days, the clip had been viewed over 6 million times. By the end of the month, it crossed 12 million. News outlets began contacting Marcus asking if the couple would give interviews. We declined every request. I didn't want attention. I wanted peace. But the internet has a strange way of finding people who never asked to be found. One Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing blueprints when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. Then another. 5 missed calls in less than 3 minutes. A voicemail appeared. Then another. Then a text. Emily, please call us. Mom. I hadn't heard from either of my parents since the wedding. Not once. Not on our honeymoon. Not after we got home. Not even to ask whether we were happy. Now suddenly, they couldn't stop calling. By the end of the day, I had 23 missed calls. Daniel looked at my phone. They've never called this much before. No. What changed? I already knew the answer. For the first time in their lives, the rest of the world had seen exactly what I had been living with for 34 years. And they desperately wanted to control the story before someone else told it. I didn't answer the first call, or the second, or the 23rd. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe anyone immediate access to me simply because we shared the same last name. By Wednesday morning, the missed calls had climbed to 31. Mom had left 4 voicemails. Dad had left 2. Rachel hadn't called at all. That surprised me more than anything. Around lunchtime, my grandmother called. I answered immediately. I suppose you've heard from your parents. I laughed quietly. Just a little. They called me too. What did they say? They wanted to know if I'd spoken to you. And I told them the truth. What truth? That if they wanted a relationship with their daughter, they should have started building it 30 years ago. I smiled despite myself. You really said that? I did. What happened? Your father got angry. I'm shocked. No, sweetheart. Her voice softened. He got scared. That caught my attention. Scared. They're worried people are judging them. I looked out the office window. Rain streaked slowly down the glass. For the first time. Grandma continued. They're experiencing something you've lived with your whole life. What do you mean? They don't get to control how people see them anymore. I had never thought about it that way. Growing up, my parents cared deeply about appearances. Our lawn was always perfectly maintained. Christmas cards were professionally photographed. Every birthday looked like something from a magazine. Dad was known as the patient principal who never raised his voice. Mom organized charity auctions and neighborhood fundraisers. Everyone admired them. Nobody saw what happened inside our family. Nobody saw the little disappointments, the forgotten promises, the constant comparisons, the way every conversation somehow became about Rachel. Now millions of strangers were asking one simple question. Why weren't they at their daughter's wedding? And for once, there wasn't an easy answer. That evening, Daniel found me reading comments online. Most were kind. Some were heartbreaking. One woman wrote, "My parents missed my college graduation because my brother had a baseball tournament. I thought I was the only one." Another said, "My father-in-law has loved me more in 5 years than my own parents did in 40. Thousands of people shared stories I'd never imagined. Different families, different countries, exactly the same pain. Daniel sat beside me. You're not reading the hateful ones, are you? There aren't many. There never are. He smiled. The internet usually argues about everything. This time, he looked at the screen. Everyone seems to agree. I nodded. They're not angry because of the wedding. They're angry because they've lived this story themselves. The next morning, my assistant knocked gently on my office door. Emily. Yes. There's someone asking for you. I don't have a meeting. He says he's your father. Every muscle in my body froze. What? He's downstairs. I hadn't told my parents where I worked. Then I remembered. The architecture firm had won several awards. My name was on the company website. Of course they found me. I looked through the conference room window toward the lobby below. Dad stood near the reception desk, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had become almost completely gray. For a brief moment, I felt 12 years old again. The little girl desperate for her father's attention. Then I remembered the 2 empty chairs. I took the elevator down. Dad smiled with obvious relief. There you are. I stopped several feet away. What are you doing here? I've been trying to call. I know. I was worried. Worried about what? He hesitated. Everything. It was the vaguest answer imaginable. He held up a paper coffee cup. I brought your favorite. Vanilla latte. He remembered. After all these years. He remembered my coffee order. The realization made my chest tighten. Not because it made me happy. Because it reminded me how confusing love can be. People can remember tiny details about you, while still failing you in the moments that matter most. I can't talk long. I understand. Another awkward silence. Finally he spoke. The internet doesn't know the whole story. No, it doesn't. So, he looked relieved. You'll tell them. I stared at him. What? You'll explain. Explain what? That Rachel needed us. There it was. Not. I'm sorry. Not. I should have been there. Not. I hurt you. His first concern wasn't me. It was his reputation. I looked at the coffee in his hand. Then back at him. Dad. When I was 12. He frowned slightly. Do you remember missing my science competition? His expression went blank. No. I won. I know you won. No. You don't. You don't remember. He looked uncomfortable. Emily. When I graduated from college. I remember that. You left halfway through. His forehead creased. I don't think that's right. It is. I have pictures. You left to help Rachel shop for furniture. He couldn't finish the sentence. I took a slow breath. You know what's strange? What? I remember every single time you weren't there. His shoulders dropped. I don't expect you to remember all of them. I just wish. I felt my voice crack. There had been one moment. One memory. One day when I had come first. Dad looked down at the untouched coffee in his hands. For the first time since arriving. He had no explanation. And somehow, that silence said more than any apology could have. Dad finally looked up. I didn't come here to argue. Then why did you come? He hesitated long enough for me to answer the question myself. The video. His shoulders stiffened. I was hoping we could keep this private. I almost smiled. Private? My entire childhood had been private. Every disappointment. Every broken promise. Every moment I'd quietly convinced myself not to make a big deal out of. Now that other people had witnessed a tiny piece of it. Suddenly privacy mattered. Dad, I haven't given a single interview. I know. I haven't posted about you online. I know. I haven't responded to anyone. I know. Then what exactly are you asking me to do? He looked around the lobby before lowering his voice. People from the school have been asking questions. Of course they had. Teachers. Parents. Former students. The principal who had spent decades giving speeches about showing up for children had missed his own daughter's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I can't control what people think. You could explain. I already have. When? At my weddings. He frowned. I invited you. I saved you 2 seats. You decided not to come. His jaw tightened. It wasn't that simple. Then make it simple. He blinked. What? Tell me. What was so important that you couldn't spare 4 hours to watch your daughter get married? For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly. Rachel needed support. I nodded. There it is. What? The answer. You don't even hear yourself. He looked genuinely confused. You still think this is about one weekend. It isn't. It never was. It's about every time you chose her. Every recital. Every graduation. Every birthday. Every promotion. Every milestone. The wedding was simply the first time everyone else noticed. Dad rubbed his forehead. You always keep score. No, I remember. There's a difference. He opened his mouth to respond. Before he could, someone walked across the lobby. Excuse me. A woman in her 60s smiled politely. I hope I'm not interrupting. We both turned toward her. She looked at me first. I knew it. She covered her mouth. It's really you. I immediately felt uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I watched your wedding film. She looked embarrassed. I cried for an hour. Dad's face drained of color. The woman continued. I just wanted to tell you. She smiled warmly. I hope you're happy. I am. You deserved that day. My throat tightened. Thank you. She nodded politely toward Dad without recognizing him. Then walked away. Neither of us spoke until the elevator doors closed behind her. Dad stared at the floor. For the first time, he had witnessed what the internet looked like in real life. It wasn't strangers attacking him. It was ordinary people recognizing pain. I should get back to work, I said. Emily. I stopped. I'm sorry people are talking. I slowly turned around. You still don't understand. His eyebrows lifted. I don't need you to be sorry they're talking. I need you to be sorry for giving them something true to talk about. I walked away before he could answer. When the elevator doors closed, my hands started shaking. Not because I'd yelled. Because I hadn't. For the first time in my life, I had told my father exactly how I felt without apologizing for it. That evening I found Daniel cooking dinner. He looked at my face and immediately turned off the stove. He came here. How'd you know? You've got your courtroom face. My what? The one you make when you're trying not to cry. I laughed. I didn't cry. Good. I almost did. He pulled out a chair. Tell me everything. After I finished, Daniel remained quiet for a long moment. Then he asked one question. Did he apologize? Not really. What was he actually upset about? I didn't even have to think. The comments. Daniel nodded slowly. I figured. He placed dinner on the table. You know what I keep thinking? What? If the video had never gone viral? He looked directly at me. Would he have come here today? The room fell silent. Because I already knew the answer. No. If the documentary had been seen by 50 people instead of 12 million, nothing would have changed. My parents would still believe they had made the right decision. The only difference now was that the rest of the world had witnessed the consequences. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. A certified envelope. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not from my parents. From Rachel. I stared at her handwriting for several seconds before unfolding the pages. The first sentence made me stop breathing. I don't think you've ever known what Mom and Dad told me about you growing up. My hands were trembling before I even reached the second paragraph. Rachel had never written me a letter. Not once. Growing up, we shared a hallway, a bathroom, holidays, birthdays, vacations. But never our thoughts. If we had something to say, we said it through our parents. Or not at all. I sat down at the kitchen table and kept reading. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I honestly wouldn't blame you if you threw this letter away. I'm writing because I've spent the last 3 weeks reading comments from strangers who seem to understand our family better than I did. I frowned. That wasn't what I expected. I always thought you were distant because you wanted to be. Mom told me you liked being independent. Dad said you hated asking for help because you wanted to prove you didn't need anyone. I stopped reading. Daniel looked up from across the room. What is it? I looked at him in disbelief. They lied to her. What do you mean? They convinced her I didn't want them. He quietly walked over and sat beside me. Keep reading. I took a deep breath. When I was 10, I asked Mom why you never came shopping with us. She said you always said no. When I asked why you spent so many weekends in Seattle after college instead of visiting home, Dad told me you were too busy for family. When you missed my product launch 3 years ago, they told me you didn't think my business was important. My chest tightened. I hadn't missed it. I had never been invited. Not once. Rachel continued. I believed them. I never questioned it because I was a kid. Then I became an adult. And somehow I still never questioned it. I turned the page. Last week I watched our parents tell 3 different people 3 different reasons why they missed your wedding. One person heard it was because of a business emergency. Another was told Mom was sick. Someone else was told you didn't want a traditional wedding. That's when I realized something. People who tell the truth don't need multiple versions of it. I slowly lowered the letter. Daniel was staring at me. She's waking up. I think so. But I looked back down. I don't know if it's too late. The next page hurt even more. Do you remember my 16th birthday? Of course I did. It had been held in our parents' backyard. More than 100 guests. Live music. Professional photographer. A chocolate fountain that everyone talked about for weeks. I hadn't wanted to go. Mom insisted. I found something after the video went viral. An old storage box in the attic. Inside were your high school debate trophies. Science medals. Architecture awards. Articles from newspapers. Everything. I frowned. Everything. They kept every single one. That made no sense. If they cared enough to save them, why had they never cared enough to celebrate them? Then came the sentence that completely changed the way I viewed my parents. None of them were displayed. They were hidden. Mine filled the living room. Yours filled dusty boxes. I closed my eyes. I could picture that attic perfectly. Dozens of cardboard containers. Christmas decorations. Old blankets. Forgotten memories. Apparently, my achievements had been stored there too. Carefully preserved. Carefully hidden. Daniel whispered. That's strange. No, I said quietly. It's worse. Because suddenly something occurred to me. They had never forgotten. For years, I'd convinced myself maybe they simply didn't realize how much they'd hurt me. Maybe they weren't paying attention. Maybe they couldn't remember. The attic proved otherwise. They remembered everything. Every award. Every article. Every accomplishment. They simply chose not to make room for them. I wasn't invisible. I had been edited out. There was a difference. Rachel's letter continued. I don't know whether Mom and Dad even realized they did this. Maybe it happened so gradually they stopped seeing it. Or maybe they always knew. I honestly don't know which possibility scares me more. I folded the pages together and stared out the window. Rain had started again. Seattle always seemed to know when life became complicated. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. This time a voicemail appeared almost immediately. I almost deleted it. Instead I pressed play. Mom's voice filled the kitchen. Emily, people are saying horrible things. I waited. They don't know what kind of parents we really were. Another pause. We loved you. Not. I'm sorry. Not. I should have been there. Just. We loved you. Daniel watched my expression change. What did she say? I replayed the message. When it ended, he remained silent. Finally, he asked, did you notice something? What? She never said. He stopped. I finished the sentence for him. That she was sorry. Exactly. She wanted me to believe she'd loved me. But love wasn't the question anymore. Actions were. And their actions had spoken much louder than that voicemail ever could. The following Saturday, Grandma Evelyn called. I think you should come here. Why? Because your mother and father are here. I frowned. They're with you. They showed up unexpectedly. What do they want? They're asking me to convince you to forgive them. I laughed quietly. Is it working? Grandma didn't laugh back. No. She lowered her voice. But something happened. What? Rachel came too. My heart skipped. And they're all in the same room. That sounds uncomfortable. It is. Another pause. Emily. What? I think your sister is about to tell your parents something they've never expected to hear. I grabbed my car keys before she'd even finished the sentence. Grandma lived in a quiet coastal town about 40 minutes north of Seattle. The drive usually helped me clear my mind. Not that afternoon. Every mile brought another question. Why had Rachel gone? Why now? And why had Grandma sounded almost hopeful? By the time I pulled into her driveway, 4 cars were already parked outside. Mine became the 5th. For a long moment, I stayed in the driver's seat. I could hear voices through the open kitchen window. Nobody was yelling. That somehow felt even more unsettling. I finally stepped out. Before I reached the porch, the front door opened. Rachel stood there. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she wasn't dressed like someone preparing for a photo shoot. She looked human. When she saw me, she didn't smile. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. She nodded. I would have understood. Neither of us moved. Neither of us knew whether we were supposed to hug, or shake hands, or simply stand there like strangers. Finally, she stepped aside. There in the living room. As soon as I walked inside, everyone looked up. Mom, Dad, Grandma. The room fell completely silent. Grandma was the first to speak. I'll make tea. Nobody believed she was making tea. She was giving us an excuse to breathe. Dad stood. Emily. I raised one hand. Please. He sat back down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rachel quietly broke the silence. I asked you all here. Mom looked surprised. You did. Yes. I think we've avoided the truth long enough. Dad frowned. What truth? Rachel looked directly at him. The truth about our family. Mom immediately crossed her arms. I don't think this is productive. It will be. No. It won't. Rachel didn't back down. It has to. She reached into her purse and placed something on Grandma's coffee table. An old photo album. Dad looked confused. What's that? Our family albums. Mom shrugged. So, I spent all night looking through them. Nobody answered. Rachel slowly opened the first album. My kindergarten graduation. She turned the page. My piano recital. Another page. My birthday. Another. My soccer tournament. Every page featured Rachel. Smiling. Laughing. Celebrating. Then she opened the second album. More Rachel. Third. Still Rachel. Fourth. Vacations. Christmas. Thanksgiving. School awards. Family dinners. Rachel gently closed the album. Then she placed another one beside it. This one is Emily's. I had never seen it before. Dad looked genuinely puzzled. We made one for each of you. Rachel opened it. The first several pages contained baby pictures. Then elementary school. Then nothing. Blank plastic sleeves. Empty pages. Until high school graduation. Another gap. Then college graduation. Another gap. Finally, one newspaper clipping from my architecture award. The rest. Empty. Rachel looked at our parents. Do you know what I counted? Neither of them answered. There are 218 photos of me. She gently touched the second album. There are 27 of Emily. The room became unbearably quiet. I thought maybe that was normal. She gave a sad little laugh. So I called my friend Megan. Mom looked confused. Why? I asked how many photo albums her parents made. And one. Rachel swallowed. Because they never separated the children. She looked at me. I didn't even realize mine existed until yesterday. Then she turned back toward Mom and Dad. I kept wondering, where are all the pictures of Emily? Mom answered quickly. We have them. Where? The attic. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Exactly. Nobody spoke. She reached into the album again. Do you know what else I found? She pulled out a folded piece of yellow paper. I almost threw this away. Dad squinted. What is it? My fourth grade essay. She unfolded it carefully. My teacher asked us to write about our hero. Mom smiled weakly. You chose your father. No. Rachel looked at her. I chose Emily. I felt the air leave my lungs. I don't remember that. I didn't either. She looked down at the faded paper. Then began reading. My big sister knows how to fix everything. She helps me with homework even when she's tired. When I'm scared, she lets me sleep in her room. I want to be like Emily because she's the smartest person I know. Rachel stopped reading. Her voice had begun shaking. I was 9. She looked directly at our parents. Do you know what your note says? She turned the paper over. Written in Mom's handwriting were just 5 words. Don't compare yourself to Emily. Rachel stared at those words. I'd completely forgotten. She slowly looked up. You spent my entire childhood convincing me she was the competition. Mom's face turned pale. Rachel. No. You don't get to interrupt this. Dad leaned forward. We never wanted you competing. You didn't have to. Rachel's voice cracked. You made sure I always won. Silence. Then she turned toward me. I don't think I ever actually hated you. She wiped away a tear. I think I was afraid that if Mom and Dad started loving you the way they should. She struggled to finish the sentence. Maybe they'd stop loving me. I had never considered that possibility. Not once. For the first time, I realized favoritism hadn't only damaged one daughter. It had quietly trapped the other one too. Nobody said a word. The only sound in the room was the old grandfather clock in Grandma Evelyn's hallway, ticking steadily as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Mom looked back and forth between us. That's not what happened. Rachel laughed softly. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound someone makes when a lie they've believed their whole life finally falls apart. Then tell me. Mom blinked. Tell you what? Why every important memory in my childhood somehow ended with Emily disappearing. Dad rubbed his temples. Rachel, your mother and I always wanted what was best for both of you. For both of us. Rachel reached for another envelope she'd brought. I've been going through old emails. Mom's expression immediately changed. What emails? The family account Dad used when I was younger. Dad frowned. I don't even remember the password. I guessed it. Rachel slid several printed pages across the coffee table. I wish I hadn't. Dad picked up the first page. His face slowly lost color. I couldn't see the words from where I was sitting. Rachel could. You wrote to Mom after Emily won that architecture scholarship. Nobody moved. You said. She glanced down at the page. Let's not make a huge deal out of this. Rachel already feels overshadowed. I stared at Dad. He avoided my eyes. Rachel picked up another page. This one was after Emily's first promotion. Her voice grew quieter. Please don't post about it online. Rachel's launch isn't getting much attention. Another page. Maybe we'll celebrate Emily another time. Another. Let's keep this weekend about Rachel. Rachel looked up. Do you know how many times those exact words appear? Dad said nothing. I counted. She swallowed hard. 23. 23. 23 moments where my achievements had been intentionally minimized. Not forgotten. Not overlooked. Chosen. I looked at my father. Is that true? He finally met my eyes. It wasn't meant the way it sounds. I almost smiled. It was remarkable how often people said that after being caught telling the truth. Then how was it meant? We were trying to protect Rachel. Rachel immediately shook her head. No. You were protecting the image you'd created. Dad looked confused. What image? The image that I always needed more. Her voice was calm now. Almost frighteningly calm. You convinced yourselves that Emily was strong enough to handle disappointment. She looked at me. So every time there was only enough attention for one daughter. She turned back toward our parents. You chose me. Mom suddenly began crying. We thought she understood. I couldn't stop myself. That's exactly the problem. Everyone looked at me. You never asked whether I understood. You decided I should. Mom covered her face. We didn't know you were hurting this much. I felt something inside me finally break. You didn't know. I stood up. I stopped inviting you to important events. Nobody answered. I stopped calling when good things happened. Still silence. When I bought my first house, I looked directly at Dad. You found out 6 months later. His eyes widened. You never told us. I did. He frowned. No. I sent pictures. I remembered it perfectly. The email. The subject line. I bought my first home. No reply. 3 weeks later, Mom had emailed asking if I could help Rachel choose flooring for her condo. Dad slowly sat back in his chair. He genuinely couldn't remember. That hurt more than if he'd admitted he ignored it. Because it proved something worse. My milestones hadn't even stayed in his memory. They'd simply disappeared. Grandma Evelyn returned from the kitchen carrying a tray with untouched cups of tea. She took one look at the room and quietly set it down. I suppose nobody wants tea. Nobody even smiled. She looked at her son. Richard. He didn't answer. I've waited a very long time for this conversation. He looked exhausted. So have I. No. Grandma shook her head. You've spent 30 years avoiding it. She sat down slowly. When Emily was 11. She looked at me apologetically. I promised myself I wouldn't interfere. I frowned. What do you mean? I saw what was happening. I blinked. You knew. She nodded. I argued with your grandfather about it more times than I can count. I had never heard this before. I kept thinking your parents would notice. She smiled sadly. They never did. Mom looked hurt. You could have said something. Grandma looked at her daughter-in-law with complete disbelief. I did. Silence. I said something dozens of times. She turned toward me. Your mother always gave the same answer. Mom whispered. What answer? Grandma repeated it word for word. Emily is mature, she'll understand. The room fell silent again. Grandma looked directly at Mom. I've spent 23 years wondering why the mature child was always expected to carry the weight that belonged to the adults. Mom broke down completely. Real tears. The kind I had waited years to see. Not because I wanted her to suffer. Because for the first time, she wasn't crying over what people online thought. She was crying over what she had actually done. I wasn't sure whether it changed anything. But it was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all day. Then Dad quietly asked a question that surprised everyone. Emily. I looked at him. If I could go back. His voice cracked. Which moment would you want back the most? I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, it wasn't my wedding. It wasn't graduation. It wasn't the science fair. There was one memory that had followed me my entire life. One that neither of them even knew existed. In the moment I told them, I watched both of my parents realize they had lost far more than a daughter's trust. I looked at my father for a long time before answering. You really want to know? He nodded. I do. I took a slow breath. I was 8. Neither of them reacted. Do you remember the night I waited on the front porch until almost 10 o'clock? Mom frowned. No. You promised you'd come to my school play. Dad looked confused. I don't remember a school play. I know. I smiled sadly. That's kind of the point. The memory came back as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. I'd been cast as the narrator. Not the lead role. Not even close. But I had practiced for weeks because my teacher told me I had a beautiful speaking voice. The entire day I kept telling everyone, my parents are coming tonight. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? Mom had even helped me iron my costume the night before. The performance started at 7. Every time I walked on stage, I looked toward the audience. 2 empty seats. Reserved for my parents. I kept thinking they were just running late. By the final curtain, they were still empty. Afterward, all the other children ran into their parents' arms. I stood beside the gym doors holding my little bouquet of flowers. The janitor eventually asked if someone was coming to get me. They're just late, I told him. He stayed with me until almost 10. Finally, Grandma Evelyn arrived. She'd driven nearly 2 hours after my teacher managed to find her phone number. Grandma covered her mouth. Oh, sweetheart. She remembered. I turned back to my parents. Do you know where you were? Neither of them answered. You were at Rachel's gymnastics practice. Mom's eyes widened. Rachel wasn't even in gymnastics when you were 8. Exactly. I let the silence settle. You don't even remember what made you miss it. Dad looked completely lost. You forgot. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. I sat on that porch convinced something terrible had happened to you. I swallowed. I kept imagining car accidents. Hospitals. I thought maybe you were hurt. I laughed quietly. It never crossed my mind that you simply forgot. Mom burst into tears. Oh my God. You forgot. The words came out barely above a whisper. You forgot your own daughter. Dad stood up so suddenly his chair scraped across the wooden floor. I never would have done that on purpose. I know. That was the tragedy. It wasn't cruelty. It was neglect so ordinary that they no longer recognized it. I carried that bouquet home. I smiled faintly. It stayed in my bedroom until all the flowers turned brown. Mom covered her face. I kept thinking. I continued. That if I waited long enough, you'd ask how the play went. I looked at both of them. You never did. The room was completely silent. Then Grandma Evelyn quietly stood and walked toward an old cabinet in the corner. She opened the bottom drawer. After a moment, she returned carrying a small cardboard box. She placed it gently on the coffee table. I think it's time. Mom looked confused. What is that? Grandma didn't answer. She opened the box. Inside were dozens of drawings. Report cards. Certificates. Handmade Mother's Day cards. Tiny crafts made from popsicle sticks. Every single one had my name on it. I stared at the box. Grandma. I couldn't bear to throw them away. I picked up a folded piece of construction paper. It was a Father's Day card. Crayon letters. Misspelled words. Inside, 8-year-old me had written. Next year I hope you can come to my play. Dad reached for the card. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He read the sentence once, then again. Then he sat down and cried. Not quietly, not politely. He cried with the kind of grief that comes when someone realizes they can never undo what they've done. No one interrupted him. No one tried to comfort him. Because there wasn't anything anyone could say. After several minutes, he finally looked at me. I don't deserve forgiveness. It was the first completely honest sentence he'd spoken all afternoon. No, I answered softly. You don't earn forgiveness by saying you're sorry. He nodded. I know. You earn trust by changing. Mom reached across the couch and took his hand. Neither of them looked at me. They simply sat together in silence. Rachel finally spoke. What happens now? Everyone looked at me. For years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd imagined yelling, walking away, making them hurt the way I'd hurt. Instead, I felt strangely calm. I don't know. It was the truth. I can't pretend 30 years disappeared because we finally had one honest conversation. Nobody argued. But I looked around the room. This is the first time we've actually talked about what happened. I stood up and picked up my purse. I'm not ready to have the family everyone suddenly wants. I looked at my parents. But maybe. I paused. One day we can build a different one. Not the family we should have been. That family was gone. Too many birthdays. Too many graduations. Too many empty chairs. Those moments would never come back. But the future was still unwritten. Whether my parents would truly change, or whether this was simply another moment of regret that would fade with time, I honestly didn't know. Some wounds heal. Others become scars that remind you where you've been without deciding where you have to go. As I walked toward the front door, Dad quietly called my name. Emily. I turned around. He held up the faded Father's Day card. I'm keeping this. I gave the smallest smile. You should. Because every time he looked at it, he'd remember something I'd spent my whole life trying not to forget. And maybe, just maybe, remembering was where becoming a better father finally began. Before you decide how this story should end, ask yourself this. If someone spent decades taking you for granted but finally accepted full responsibility without making excuses, what would they have to do, not say, to earn a place back in your life? I'd genuinely love to read your answers in the comments.